let me see if I can do it without being too egregious, I guess is the
Without
word.
mentioning any names.
My boss's boss was in the room with Bill Gates when Jobs called and said, "Hey, I'm out of money. I can't make payroll. I need you guys to buy, uh, uh, $1 million of Apple stock so I can keep this Apple thing going." And though you and your listeners may remember that Microsoft made a $2.5 million investment in Apple at that time, owned a huge amount of Apple at that time. And Bill Gates, let's just say that Bill Gates was not happy that Steve Jobs called.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the next installment of Azure Cloud Talk. I'm one of your hosts, Alec Harrison, here with co-host Brian, and our special guest, Tim Huckaby, CTO of Lucihub. Worked on Windows MT, been around the block a few times. We were name dropping some people you knew before. And I think you even made the comment of you haven't been scared out of tech yet. So welcome.
Thanks, boys. Yeah, great to be here.
Nice.
Yeah. You want to touch on a little bit of, I think it's always fun to talk tech, how people got into tech, what their journeys look like. So how did you get started? How did you, get into the Microsoft sphere?
Great.
Yeah, all that.
We did not talk about that, but it's a fairly good story. I think it's fairly amusing. I went to an all boys Catholic high school in Los Angeles. We didn't have computer science or programming. We had Latin, right?
Nice.
So I went to the University of San Diego. Almost went to Notre Dame, UCLA, but I ended up at the University of San Diego. And at that school, shows how old I am. They gave you your freshman curriculum, and they gave me a programming class in Pascal. Okay, Pascal has semicolons, by the way. Very similar to what we see in C#. So
Nice.
in any event, I had barely touched a computer to that point, and I just fell in love with it. I took every class the university had in programming. We used to call it programming back then. And then jumped out into the job market, writing code, and just adored it. This is a very long time ago. The key to Microsoft is I was working at a big SI here in San Diego, and a few things happens, and I find myself in a meeting in Redmond, Washington, with a bunch of people screaming at each other, and the head product manager looks at me. And, I knew no one in the room. There's like 30 people crammed in a conference room at Microsoft, and says, "This is your new program manager for the architecture team on the blah 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 la 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 la." And they all looked at me with disdain, and I thought, "Oh my God, what am I getting into?" Being that said, greatest career move of my life. I've made lifelong friends at Microsoft. This was the extended Windows NT team that I had joined, and I was the dev lead on an architecture team. I learned so much. I learned there how professional software is built. The difference is between then and what you guys do now. We had 2,500 people on that product team. Get your arms around that.
Oh, wow.
2,500 people building essentially one piece of software, Windows NT. And then I was on the first IIS for Windows NT. Essentially, I was on Option Pack, if you guys are old enough to remember that. Windows NT Option Pack had the first IIS and a number of firsts, like their site server product, which I did the architecture for, and some content replication stuff that MSN used at the time. And blah, 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 blah. Anyways, these are lifelong friends. Like, I'd sit in a meeting with a 20-year-old Scott Guthrie. He's probably like 22, just graduated from Duke, and I was just little junior, young, developer guy with a great team of brilliant people. So that's really what launched my career. I founded a company after that, and blah blah blah. So that's how I got into technology. And like I was telling you guys earlier, I still love it. This whole AI thing, I've always been a cutting edge guy. If you want to go there, one of the companies I founded whose sole purpose was cutting edge software. It built software for some of the biggest companies in the world. And I just adored it. I loved it. Yeah, still do. Yeah, so that's me. Now I should say, am I cut to now? Is that where
Yeah,
we
yeah,
want?
that works.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So I founded two companies. One was an ISV. If your audience doesn't know that term, that's a software product company. And we built an AI product. Oh man, I was super proud of it. A long time ago too. That was based in computer vision, and it's still around. And the code that I did, and I built the first product, and then we got real developers involved. Super cool. But because it was so long ago, we were so ahead of our time. Nowadays, computer vision, which we can also talk about, God, is so advanced. Back then it was basically faces, and facial recognition identification was a solved problem back then. Recognizing objects are so different, so much harder. Anyways, I founded these two companies, and it just so happened right before the pandemic, I found myself without a job, meaning I sold my interest in these two companies. One was custom software, one was a product company. The custom software one was Internology, which is fairly well known in the Microsoft ecosystem. We're the ones that built the CNN Magic Wall, by the way, that you still see on TV today. So I turned to my wife and said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take a break. Because as you guys know, running a company is not so fun. Writing code is super fun.
Right.
Right. So I fly fished. I'm a fly fisherman. I literally fly fished the world. I went on a keynote tour in Europe, and just as an example, the head guy at Microsoft in the Stockholm office is like, well, my family has had a cabin for 14 generations, but it's in the middle of nowhere and takes, 14 hours to get to, and it doesn't have plumbing or electricity, but the fishing is great. You want to go? I'm like, I'm in. So I did. Unfortunately, when you do that, your wife comes back at you and says, hey, you got to get back to work. So I joined this awesome startup. I don't know about you guys, but I seem to have this addiction to the adrenaline of a technology startup.
So when you did that, are these ideas you had, or some ideas somebody else had?
Well, my current job as CTO of Lucihub was not my idea. Being that said, I've had the privilege to introduce a bunch of AI into the product suite that is so joyful and awesome and powerful. Oh man, I just love my new job. Plus, I'm not the big boss.
Nice.
So it's like I always joke. It's like I have a part-time job. If I'm not the big boss and dealing with all the crap that goes with employees, all I have to do is deal with the awesome developers on the team and the product managers. So good. So anyways, yeah, I do that now. Lucihub does professional video production. Okay, you with me?
Mm-hmm.
Like a Nike commercial historically would cost like, I don't know, $250,000 to $500,000 to produce and take 6 weeks long to produce it. Well, we could do that with software innovation and then some AI, which I can talk about. We could do that in 3 days for a fraction of that cost. You've heard this story before. There are a lot of expensive horizontal industry type things that can totally benefit from AI and software automation. So yeah, you want me to just keep rolling? My baby in the Lucihub company is internally we call the product Butterfly. You know how you give your software products, internal names? We name everything about bugs. I'm trying to think of what the marketing people call it. Creative.
I'm not sure I want to call my code after bugs. That seems dangerous.
Well, see, there's some irony there.
Yeah.
And there's probably a story behind it. Actually, we named them after bugs that can be eaten by fly fishing trout. came from me, you know. So we have mayfly and there's pharaoh ant and all that. Anyways, we, you know, us developer guys and gals, you know, we give these internal names that are easy to say and quickly in meetings, and the marketing people apply. You know, this has been going on for years. I think it's called Creative Copilot. Anyways, it allows you to do. Is the audience familiar with like what an LLM wrapper is, or should I explain that?
I'd probably explain it just in
Yeah,
case.
we do.
Okay, LLM, ChatGPT, Mistral, the French one. You know, Google has one. Shoot, even Apple and Facebook have one. Microsoft has chosen GPT as to you know, put their guardrails around in Azure OpenAI. An LLM wrapper application is something that uses that in the background, a GPT-like thing, almost like structured storage, almost like a database, and then builds an application around it to insulate the user from having to prompt. You and your users know that the success is in using an LLM is directly related to the prompt. And you know, people who are good at GPT are really think through how they ask it questions, right? So our mantra was, when we started this butterfly project, I'll tell you what it does in a second, is if Grandma Huckaby, who no longer exists, by the way, but if Grandma Huckaby would to step up to this application, she would be able to use it easily and effectively, as opposed to putting her in front of OpenAI.com and her trying to figure out a prompt, right? So what this application does, it generates a shot list, a storyboard, a script, ultimately so that's all the pre-production stuff. Ultimately a you know, PR, like blog posts and things like that. All that stuff that an LLM could really help a creative with. You know, if Brian, if you said, "Oh, I got this idea to do a movie about the Iowa State Cyclones and the history of the football program there,"
Sounds amazing.
which everyone would want to watch, right?
Right.
So you know, the idea would, you'd step up to it and say exactly that, and it would come out with your script, this and a shot list, meaning that's the content creators, the people with the cameras. You know, here's what they shoot, and then a sample storyboard. A storyboard would be like pictures of the shot, right? This is what is behind professional video. You know, you could easily run this podcast through our software and not have to deal with Adobe, what is it, Premiere, or some other editing type of thing.
Like Camtasia, you could replace it.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Oh
yeah.
man, that's awesome.
Well, it's awesome in one way, in that these creative people, it's wildly effective, makes them go faster. But some people just love to edit. Creatives love to spend hours, and I get it. You know, we love tinkering, we love our tools.
Sure.
And don't get me wrong, we do have humans involved in the process. Absolutely. In fact, in the beginning, in the middle, and in the end. In the end, you know, there are editors in Adobe Premiere, you know, making sure what came out of software automation actually works. You know, you know, we still can't replace creative in AI, at least not for a decade. So there's a lot of human. Not, I shouldn't say a lot. We've minimized the human interaction, and that's why the value prop. But you know, Microsoft and the other big companies, software, hardware, technology companies are our customers. You know, and if you think it through, a company like Microsoft, who produces so much video content,
right,
in terms of guidance and things like that, it's a no-brainer for them. Makes them, it lets them go faster. You know, it doesn't eliminate jobs; it just makes them go faster. So yeah, that's what I do, and it's super fun. It's so fun.
Yeah. So,
but it hasn't been easy.
okay.
Right. you guys, I'm sure have done your Azure OpenAI, or maybe the other, in
We
the
like to
other
spend
world.
money on Azure AI.
Oh my, it's funny you said. You should have seen our Azure bill last year
I
or
can't
last
even
month.
imagine. I can't
Oh
even
my God.
imagine.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I'm
I
like,
yeah, go ahead.
so we have to build all this instrumentation now to see because honestly, we're in the startup program at Microsoft, so we're going for free right now.
Right.
But that
Yep.
gravy train ends in a couple months, so we really got to now back down services and automate, and
Figure
all
out
that.
where the
Well,
lead is.
last month the Azure bill comes in, and if you know this, when you're for free, they don't give you enough detail to figure
Right.
out where the spend is coming. So we have to instrument our app to figure out, hey, is this us spending all the money, or is it our customers?
Mm.
It's tricky, and you
Yeah.
really can't complain about it because you're getting it for free.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, anyways,
So with your product, a lot of our, like Alec and I are both content producers, and a lot of our audience probably is either an MVP or aspiring MVP who also wants to be a content producer. Is this something that Joe Schmo can use, or do I need a
totally.
pretty decent budget?
Yeah, totally. It's super inexpensive,
Okay.
and I have no idea how much it costs, but there are like professional um what do you God, you're testing my social skills here. The people that make YouTube videos.
Content creators, basically,
Well, that's a nice way of saying it.
influencers.
Yeah, influencers. There are influencers that make enough in YouTube that can pay the small fee to have, to let them produce video content faster. I should
Sure.
also say, which is important, that this is a legitimate content creation device in Hollywood.
Hmm.
And I've made a lot of bold predictions in my time, and I never would have predicted that.
Yeah.
You probably have heard that TV commercials are being done solely on iPhones, and it's just a matter of time before movies are made solely on iPhones. Um, and please don't ask me to speculate if virtual Brad Pitt is going to exist in in a few years or not.
Can I put a movie that I made on my iPhone and have Brad Pitt in it with a virtual Brad Pitt? That's what I want to
Not
know.
without him suing you.
Right? Right. I mean,
That's interesting because I think is WWDC their keynote event. They show off every time now because I think those are all done via iPhone. There's some peripherals to like make it more steady and all that, but like you see a little iPhone like nestled right there in
it's
a
crazy.
lot of their frames. It's like,
Isn't
wow.
it? It is. I think it's funny too, Alec. It just, who would have thought that our primary, even at a personal level, our primary camera would be our telephone. No
Right.
way would I have predicted that. And the first smartphones that came out, had like a $10 camera in them. Now, it's probably
Now you buy your camera based on how many megapixels it has.
yeah, right.
Or your
Now
phone, excuse me. Your
it's
phone.
probably a $30 camera. It's probably still cheap inside this iPhone I have, but the software is so good. There's another thing that's changed. I never would have praised Apple in the old days, but man, they've done a good job with that phone. Yeah.
We're not
Unless you
allowed
ask
to
my
talk
wife
about
about their
Apple
photo
products.
software.
I miss my Windows phone. I say that all the time.
I had a
Damn it, I
Windows
miss my
phone.
Windows phone.
Oh my goodness. Wasn't that something back in the day?
Watching that thing implode was not something.
I bet. I can't even imagine.
Oh
So
my
were you on the front lines for that?
No, I didn't work on the product team, but my company, Internology, was building Windows Phone apps.
Mhm.
And the all that, I shouldn't say all, a significant amount of that Windows Phone team left heartbroken and pissed off.
Yeah.
And moved to Amazon, and they did Alexa. I don't know if you know that, but yeah, a lot of those brilliant people are doing Alexa over there. They told us, if you build it, they will come. We will come, or something like that. Something trite and obvious. meaning if you build the software for the Windows Phone, then we're gonna guarantee it gets adopted. And they failed to get adopted. And I think a lot, one of the reasons was they released it without Facebook. Like, what? I don't know if you remember those days, but one could speculate that Microsoft went to Facebook and said, "Hey, we want to build, an app for the Windows Phone." And Facebook said, "No, you don't."
Yeah, it was real interesting. There was a guy I worked with who had one, and he like praised it up and down, but it missed some like very basic apps that I felt like all the other smartphones had. They was like, "Oh, what do you do that?" "Well, I just load it up in a web browser." I'm like,
Right.
"How's it look on your phone?" "Not
Yeah.
great, but I don't really get on." Facebook is one you brought up, and it's like, I don't really use that on my phone. And like, fast forward to now, like Reddit has apps, Facebook has an app, Instagram has an app. Who knows how much time I waste on my phone doing things,
It's awful.
messaging people and all that sort of stuff.
Right.
So it's like
Yeah.
you brought out an app store that didn't really have anything when it launched, and it was getting some stuff, but how long do people stick around? Or like people don't really buy the phone. I think was it the Fire phone had a similar experience? Yeah, Amazon had a phone for a very short while.
An Amazon phone. Yeah.
It was kind of the same thing, right? Like Apple and Android had these big marketplace of apps that were pretty decentralized. Apple has their walled garden, right? But they didn't build most of the apps in it. And then it was like, how do you build that from scratch? Like you have to incentivize like both sides of the market. You have to incentivize the consumers to buy your phone, but you also have to now incentivize the app developers to, hey, here's a third thing you now need to be on.
I don't know if you guys remember this, but because since we already mentioned him, Steve Jobs was totally against the App Store. Absolutely against it. Completely against third parties writing applications for the iPhone.
Right. He wanted it all internal.
Exactly. And he saw the success of what Android had did and said, "Oh, well, maybe he got talked out of it. Maybe Tim Cook talked him out of it or something like that." Yeah.
He was pretty good at adapting.
Yes, he was. Absolutely. Amazing guy. Wandered India on acid for like a year or something like that. I don't know if you ever read his biography. It's amazing. He was a character. Yeah.
It is funny or interesting how even the progression of that company. I know we don't talk about Apple stuff much, but I really like he left and was like, I'm going to build my own computer company, and then he got acquired back to Apple, and I think that's what eventually became the Macintosh was his next computers. Yeah.
The board basically kicked him out.
Yep, they fired him from his own
because
company.
he was so obnoxious. I have a great Bill Gates story. I shouldn't even. I can't tell you. Oh God, it has. Yeah, let me see if I can do it without being too egregious. I guess
without mentioning any names.
My boss's boss was in the room with Bill Gates when Jobs called and said, "Hey, I'm out of money. I can't make payroll. I need you guys to buy, $1 million of Apple stock so I can keep this Apple thing going." And though you and your listeners may remember that Microsoft made a $2.5 million investment in Apple at that time, owned a huge amount of Apple at that time. And Bill Gates, let's just say that Bill Gates was not happy that Steve Jobs called. And leave it at that. said something like, I don't want to quote it directly because it has a bunch of F words in it, but basically hung up on him saying, our lawyers are called your lawyers.
Oh jeez.
That was probably also the same. Was it the WWDC where Bill Gates was on the projector screen, like above Jobs, and a bunch of people freaked out because they were like, the Microsoft overlords looked like they were there or whatever.
Oh, right. I haven't thought about that in a long time. Yeah, good time. So in my career, I've been lucky enough to be the demo boy at a lot of these exec keynotes. Like, I had the ASP.NET demo in the .NET launch. Is a Bill Gates keynote. Great demo. Even Bill Gates liked that one. It was super
Nice.
cool because ultimately, yeah, the whole premise was during the event you build an application on stage, and this would be Everett .NET 1.1, which was internally called Everett.
Okay.
So that's 2003. All right. So Bill Gates introduced me and my buddy who was building the Windows Form app, in the same capacity in the beginning of the keynote. And then an hour later, we come out with what we have built. Of course, it was completely fake and baked. And, it was like a Hollywood production. We memorized our lines. And in fact, one of the producers said to me, Tim, you've got a minute 31 to do your demo with a flexibility of 5 seconds either way. If you're outside of that range, you will never work in this effing industry again. That direct quote, right? Bill Gates' keynotes were totally tight, absolutely tight. Steve Ballmer loved winging it, but Bill Gates, anyways. So what was my point? Oh, I come out and I show this cool ASP.NET app that talks to SQL Server, and then I bring out a BlackBerry. Remember that? While we're talking about devices, I bring out a BlackBerry and it runs the ASP.NET in its little browser, and it just looks perfect. It's freaking awesome. And Bill Gates is like, God, I didn't even know we could do that. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. All right, there's a story.
Nice.
That's awesome. I'm curious. I know Brian and I have talked about it, but how do you talk about continuing to stay in the industry, stay on the cutting edge? How do you manage to keep up with all the new, latest and greatest things?
I don't. Do you? I mean,
we try.
Oh,
but only in like silos at this point for me. It used to be more breadth,
right. You got to focus on something. And back in the old days, let me just tell you, we used to whine about the same whining we did 20 years ago is the same whining we do now. They're going so fast, I can't keep up. The competitive angle, the Microsoft regional director thing. If you want to contrast an MVP and an RD, us RDs are supposed to understand the competitive side. And that's literally impossible these days, even if you silo yourself into something very narrow. I'm trying to think of an example. I guess it doesn't matter. But those teams at Microsoft deliver software differently now. They don't do 2-year cadences like when I worked on the Windows team. Every 2 years, with 2,500 people, you have a party and you release Windows. And they're releasing weekly in some of these, and they don't document the features anymore. They don't talk about them. They just appear. That Azure portal drives me nuts. Right? It's always changing, and there's
how many times have you opened up the Azure portal and said, "Who asked for this?"
or you look at the URL and say, "Am I in the Azure portal?" Yeah. Those guys just go fast, and that's a double-edged sword. Obviously, we want all the stuff they're doing. We absolutely want it, but keeping up is tricky. In my career, I've always been on the developer side of things. We call it DevOps now. Back in the old days, we called it something different. That whole DevOps monster, I'm trying to just be dangerous in it right now. Just learn enough to know how it works. And oh my God, it's overwhelming. It's so overwhelming. And you could literally spend your entire day 24/7 just learning Azure DevOps and the whole pipeline thing between GitHub. Oh my, it's wild.
Well,
now,
the worst part is
languages. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, you're fine. I was gonna say the worst thing is there's like 6 different ways to do it. So are you going to host your repo in GitHub? Are you going to host your repo in ADO? Are you going to have your repo in GitHub, but your ADO boards? Are you going to have your boards in GitHub? How are you going to wire those together? Who's responsible for making tickets? When does the ticket get closed? Who's going to close it with an automation? And then, so it's
did you buy Jira in that whole thought process too?
No.
So Brian, you're
the devil.
Brian, you're making me laugh, and clearly your way around DevOps by that statement. Yesterday, I asked the developer. I said, like, and he's brilliant. He's like, wait, what? You deploy app environments straight from Visual Studio? And he's like, doesn't everybody?
Oh no.
I'm like, no, I'm in the Azure portal.
We call that in the biz click ops.
Click ops.
Yeah, I
Friends
like that.
don't let friends right click and publish.
Yeah. So, that's on the developer side of things. On the AI side of things, if you live in the Microsoft world, it's basically APIs. So it's a lot easier. Their stack is huge, but at least they're APIs.
See, I'm a much more practical person. I'm a practical learner. I'm a doer. You teach me the theory, I need to do it. I understand the theory after I do it. AI to me is this magic box of theory. And it's like, oh, if you just send it this thing, some magic stuff's going to happen and it's going to send you this result. And voila, you did it in half the time.
Yeah, if you're the type of person, I totally agree with you, Brian. If you're the type of person who buys a car and needs to take the engine apart to see how it works, then AI is going to drive you nuts and you're going to hate it because you're exactly right. It's an API, and let's be honest. API, AI is broad. The whole LLM thing is magic. I still don't understand what happens. In computer vision, at least I understand what the engine is doing. Meaning, if my application sends a photo to an API back there somewhere in Azure, I know what's happening. There's a machine learned model that people have traced what I'm looking for. Say it's a cat, traced and learned on it, and there's some algorithms involved, and at least I understand. But in the LLM, when I hear Sam Altman say things like hallucinations are a feature, which he says, I'm like, they're not a feature I want. Let me turn that off, please. And remember the application, this butterfly application at Lucihub I was telling you about. Some of the hallucinations are spectacular. Even when we have sunk a ton of engineering, a ton of real engineering into prompt engineering, and then we run semantic kernel, if you're familiar with that set of bits, to orchestrate, the whole thing. Every once in a while, it comes back with something we're like, huh? What?
Yeah, it's interesting because like Gen AI is literally just hallucinating, right? Because you're basically predicting the next phrase or word. That's kind of how it works. So if you wanted no hallucinating, you basically lose all of generative AI. So it's like a double-edged sword, right? Because you still want Gen AI and LLMs, but depending on your use cases, where you draw that line of what is defined as a hallucination and what's a feature. So like, I get based on that definition, right? Like there's a line there, and everybody's use case, that line is, different.
Yeah.
Unless you want pure deterministic system, then at that point you just have the wrong tool altogether. But
you make great points, Alec. In my issue, as long as Brian has, got us all charged up on this, my issue is, ultimately programming, development of software is ones and zeros, ons and off. It either works or it doesn't. Well, in generative AI, or what I call an LLM, it gives you different answers. It's not on or off. I could say, where did the Cyclones of Iowa State get their team name? Just ask GPT. And then I ask it again, and it gives me a different answer. That drives me nuts, by the way. That's not ones and zeros. That's not on and off. That's like hardware. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't,
Yeah. It's almost like the double slit experiment in quantum physics, right? It's like, if we observe it, it's going to be this thing. But if we don't observe it, it's going to maybe be this thing or the other thing. We don't really know.
So you know your way around quantum, too. Not
that much. Enough to be dangerous. It's 0-1 in some other ephemeral state, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And in between.
I have the pleasure to know some quantum experts, and they always try to explain it to me. you know.
Yeah.
And I do my studying and my research, and I'm like, oh man. And then you go back to like Einstein in quantum physics, and he said, in the theory of relativity, if you read his biography, he says, if this last part, the quantum part, if I'm wrong, this thing whole falls apart. I haven't proven it. I haven't proven it right. I'm just speculating that this is what's happening. That to me is kind of interesting.
His answer was quantum. Maybe, maybe not. You never know.
Well, maybe not, or other.
Right.
That's quantum
I think
to me.
it's really funny too, because like I've seen OpenAI. So I made this joke as a joke, and then OpenAI delivered something that is very similar. People talked about the exact use case and pain point you're talking about, right? Like if you ask my model a question, I ask the model a question, there is a very high likelihood, it's probably pretty close to 100%, that we will get some variation of answer. It will not be text by text the exact same answer, probably, right? It'll have different words around it. It might be the same content in the middle, but it could also be just completely a different answer. And I made a joke to somebody once of, well, if you wanted to make sure it was deterministic, you could kind of just throw like a Redis cache in front of it, right? You just don't talk to the model once it gets that specific answer. Granted, you have the issue of your cache growing too big, but then everybody gets the same answer. You save a little bit on tokens. And then OpenAI announced something where you can do like a seed base, and it's basically a cache. You give it a seed. Everybody who asks the question on that seed can basically find the same answer, and it returns back at a fraction of the cost. They don't say it, but it seems like there's just a cache in front of OpenAI that it looks at based on your seed, will return you the same answer. If you Google something, and I'll post the link here because I'm blanking, but something like deterministic chat GPT, they talk about that feature that came out in like 2000, I think it was 22, 23 ish. But it was just basically like they put a cache in front of the AI model, and now it's deterministic. Because if you and I ask the same question, it doesn't even call the LLM. The API first checks our cache and then just gives it back to you if I have it. And you save on tokens because we didn't have to ask the compute anything. We just asked our cache.
But
I thought that was kind of funny.
that is super interesting. But wouldn't it be cost prohibitive on the OpenAI side to hold a cache like this for everyone in the world?
They haven't talked about it a lot, so I'm wondering if they kind of like put it away. But I remember when that was announced, it was basically getting more deterministic AI models, and
Interesting.
the way they framed it didn't look like that. But when you took a step back and you're like, if I have to provide you a key value and then ask it a question, this seems to me that like you're building a massive Redis cache, and I just know that like, okay, you're, the seed or your key
Right.
is ABC123. That's your your unique key with my, passcode. It sounds like they just did a key value pair for a Redis cache or something in front of it, and they're just caching answers, and eventually they fall off. It's something interesting to look at if you're trying to solve the deterministic problem with a non-deterministic system.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Do you know what else is interesting? You literally can't make this stuff up. So I typed into ChatGPT, how did the Iowa State Cyclones get their name? And it says, hey, you're evaluating a new version of ChatGPT. Here's a side-by-side of two different answers. Which one do you prefer?
No way. No way. Is that
it's just different verbiage in the two side by side, but you can then select which one you prefer as the response.
Is that 4.0?
It's
Or
whatever's no, it's the free version of ChatGPT out there right now. So I think that's still on. Well, maybe it is 4 because I think you get a free amount of I think you get a free amount of tokens before they shut you down to the older one. But yeah, it's whatever's on ChatGPT.com or whatever.
I wonder, we're just talking about how these features come fast and furious. I wonder if they have that on the API, because for Lucihub, that might be very valuable for us.
Yeah, to split it and say which one do you prefer and go this direction.
Yeah, or to build two scripts. Here's one way and here's another way. Which one?
Yeah, that's exactly what this is. It's all textual verbiage, but it's in different order and different words. Like one's in Evanston, Illinois, and one's just a Chicago Tribune headline said this. And before this, the team was known as Ames. The name resonated quickly. On the other one says the name resonated quickly and became associated with the team. So like different ways it's associating the text together. And Yeah. So it's really interesting.
That is.
Yeah.
And it's opening Pandora's box, but okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting how they roll out. I'd be curious too, as somebody who I assume you guys are following more common team practices at your new place. How does it feel to go from a dev team or a product team of like 2,500 people down to the like what's the lowercase agile two pizza rule team? You know,
Well, I realized in my prior companies, I didn't do that big jump off the waterfall from 2,500 to 4. In my prior companies, an efficient dev team was 3 devs and a PM,
yeah.
right? And I think that's a test. And certainly, maybe you're saying with the two pizza roll thing that it's now 2 devs without a PM. But I think the overarching point is the plumbing, the platform, and the tools are so much better
Mhm.
than they were. It used to be hard to build software. It's not, as hard as it was 20 years ago, without a doubt. You know, and that's great. We've enabled the masses. That whole what do they call that power platform thing? What's the generic?
Power
Low
apps,
code, low
Power
low
code,
code.
tools,
low code.
low code.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, or no code. That whole low code, no code thing. It's it's uh it's another double-edged sword, of course. But
Yeah.
what I'm trying to be politically correct here,
Right.
right? But it is amazing what these departmental people can do. And then they dump it on you, and you have to deal with it. But and turn it into a real app with real infrastructure. But nonetheless, it's amazing. In all honesty, I don't think that ever would have happened unless Moore's law continued to execute. Moore's law. Remember from Iowa State when you were in programming classes that he made that prediction, that bold prediction in like the 50s about. He said twice as many transistors on a circuit board every 2 years, which equates to CPU power ultimately. So now we cram trillions, 70 trillion transistors on the current gen of CPUs. And our CPUs are so powerful that you can get away with wrapping a wrapped wrapper in these low code, no code solutions.
Mhm.
This thing, they haven't figured out battery yet, obviously. He or she who figures out the battery wins. But these things are wildly powerful. And we were talking about building apps earlier for these things. That used to be really hard natively. Now we have all these dev frameworks for them, and that's because we're wrapping, right?
Right.
And the CPU can overcome it.
Mhm.
That's good in my opinion. That's great.
Yeah. So
Moore's
like
law,
Maui.
.NET Maui.
Yeah.
.NET Maui is. I know a bunch of people on the .NET Maui team. Um, it's amazing. I
Yeah.
think it's not perfect, of course. Our latest at Lucihub, I'm glad you brought up .NET Maui. Our latest project is a Blazor.NET Maui app. And I told you about the pre-production software, that butterfly thing.
Mhm.
And then there's software automation that ultimately produces the final video. But in between, editors have to do a bunch of stuff, or we have to software automate it. Well, our latest product is going to integrate a bunch of AI to help the editors, and it happens to be built in .NET Maui. So, but in Blazor, which is like, um, it's like what, compiled WPF or
Mhm.
web compiled WPF. I guess you could call it that. I've been still staring at what the developers are doing, and it's pretty cool. It's pretty
Yeah.
amazing. But Brian, you made that um, comment, which is so relevant a minute ago about understanding what's happening, the black magic.
Right.
That to me, that Blazor thing that's creating client side code. I, who knows what's happening, but it works.
Yeah. I think it's living on top of WebAssembly. Right. Am I wrong
Yeah,
about that? I think that's what it's doing. It's
I think
basically
that
saying leverage the WebAssembly to essentially eliminate the need for JavaScript, which there are a bunch of .NET 2 and 4 developers that are cheering for joy right now.
Yeah, amen. Anything on the client side, eliminate it completely. Oh, here I'll give you another great one of how old I am. When I was there during the when Bill Gates wrote that famous memo, "We're late to the internet," that famous email, "We're late to the internet. You know, we need to embrace the internet," and blah blah blah. You know the email I'm talking about. Anyways, I read that email and I'm like, and then I looked at an HTML form submit, and I'm like, can I say the BS? I said, this is BS. I told my dev team, this is BS. Who would do this? This
Right.
isn't programming. This is gonna fail. TCP/IP, disconnected protocol. You know, why would we do this? We have beautiful binary protocols.
Oh,
you know,
my goodness.
this internet thing is gonna die. But to my credit, I didn't realize that Cisco would make a bad thing worse by inventing that first, what was it, 2550 router, 2500, whatever it was, you know?
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Yep.
Good times.
It's funny. I was just talking to somebody about this last night, even about your next JavaScript framework and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I think if you look it up, the guy who invented JavaScript created it in like 3 days or less.
Really?
Like he was just goofing around, and now everything is built on it. It's like, why does this suck? It's like, because let's put you in like a hackathon for 3 days and tell you the thing you built, the entire world is now going to build on top of, and see how far you get and how much you can do.
Right.
I didn't know that. I did
Yeah.
not know that. Yeah, you know, Scott Guthrie basically created .NET over a weekend. You've heard that story, right?
Yeah, those
Yeah.
guys are crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy smart. That's why I always say I feel like the dumb kid in the room, because like you get around something like
guy
that.
in the world. Let me tell you, boys, he is the nicest guy in the world.
That's awesome.
Family guy, has 2 kids, you know, his wife works, for God's sakes. Yeah. His only huge problem is he went to Duke, you know, and everyone hates
everybody's got to have something that they did wrong in their life.
Yeah.
And that is a big one.
Yeah.
Sorry, I misspoke. It was created in 10 days for Netscape. One guy created it in 10 days.
Still, that's impressive. And we all hopped on the bandwagon. And now
everybody's like, this stuff is amazing. It doesn't work right, but it's amazing.
And it's not super secure, but it's great.
Who cares about security? Back then, we put our connection strings in the HTML source code.
Because we could.
Because we had to.
Yeah, because we had to. Yeah.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
ASP.
Well, it was great talking to you, Tim. Do you have any last minute shout outs or plugs that you want to throw here at the end as we kind of wind down, or how do our followers connect with you if they want to see your journey?
I don't need to plug anything because I talked about Lucihub, and the marketing people in that company will be happy about that.
Nice.
Yeah. Shout outs. Well, I'm going to meet you 2 guys in person at the MVP Summit in March.
I'm looking forward to that. That'll be awesome.
That is a fun time. That's like at this time, it's like a college reunion for me. You know, it's just so freaking fun.
Yeah, it's a great thing, because remote work is awesome, and working on things with people in cahoots, like creating content, or like Gregor Suddy right now is running the festive tech calendar. Every day people are giving him content but then like Gregor will show up at the MVP Summit and you're like, holy crap, I can actually talk to this person in person, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of experience for me is obviously the insider knowledge you get is pretty cool too, but the person to person knowledge is like, wow, this is amazing. So it makes it worth every penny in the long run.
I tell you what, you're going to remember me saying this, but you sit in a room and some guy or gal that you admire is presenting and talking roadmap for stuff that's not going to ship for a year and a half.
Right.
Especially in AI. Here's what we're thinking about doing. And it's stuff you cannot It cannot come out of your mouth. You can't
Right.
write it. You can't blog it. You can't talk about it on this
Can't
thing.
say anything.
But if you're in a career where you want to target the future of your product, or even your career based on what they're gonna do, that I always aligned what Internology used to do based on Microsoft's product roadmap. Because if you're first out the gate, it's huge advantage. So that's what I love about it. You just won't get NDA info anywhere but at that particular thing, or unless you have a blue badge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So there you go. Certainly was a pleasure to meet you guys and
Same.
talk on this thing. Let me tell some stories.
It's a
Yeah, it was
blast.
awesome. We appreciate it.
Love
Yeah.
the inside, the AI stuff. That's gonna resonate well. But
Yeah.
I'm glad somebody agrees with me that the doing is sometimes better than the magic. Maybe.
Get used to it. It's a wrapped world.
Oh no.
All right. Thanks, everybody. See you guys next time. Bye.